In the rugged mountains of Arizona, where red rocks stretched toward endless blue skies, Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she examined the strange markings on the canyon wall. As a geological surveyor for the state, she had mapped countless miles of wilderness, but these symbols carved into the stone were unlike anything in her textbooks. The intricate patterns seemed to dance in the afternoon light, telling stories she couldn't understand. Her GPS device beeped, indicating she was miles off her planned route. The morning had started simply enough, a routine survey of mineral deposits near the Superstition Mountains. But when her equipment malfunctioned and led her down an unmarked trail, Maria found herself in a hidden valley that didn't appear on any modern map. The silence here felt different, heavier, as if the very air held secrets from another time. As she traced the symbols with her finger, the stone felt warm despite being in shadow for hours. Local Apache elders had often spoken of sacred places hidden in these mountains, locations where their ancestors had built strongholds that could never be found by outsiders. Maria had always assumed these were just legends, stories passed down to preserve cultural heritage. But standing here, surrounded by evidence of sophisticated engineering and ancient wisdom, she began to question everything she thought she knew about this land. The canyon walls rose nearly 300 feet on either side, creating a natural fortress that would be invisible from above. Narrow passages led deeper into the rock formation, carved with such precision that they seemed to follow the mountain's natural flow, while clearly being human-made. Water trickled from hidden springs, creating a system that could sustain a community for months or even years. The Apache hadn't just found this place, they had transformed it into something extraordinary. Dr. James Whitmore, a historian specializing in Native American cultures, had spent decades searching for places exactly like this. His grandfather had served in the cavalry during the Apache Wars of the 1880s and had written in his private journals about fortresses that seemed to vanish into thin air. Military commanders had reported tracking Apache warriors to specific locations, only to find empty desert when they arrived with reinforcements. These accounts had been dismissed as the confused memories of soldiers exhausted by desert warfare. But Maria's discovery suggested something far more remarkable. The Apache had not only hidden from the U.S. Army, they had created an entire network of concealed strongholds that remained invisible to modern technology. The engineering required to build such places demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of geography, water systems, and defensive architecture that challenged conventional assumptions about Native American capabilities. As evening approached, Maria made camp at the valley's entrance, too fascinated to leave. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly in the twilight, and she could swear she heard whispers carried on the desert wind. Her satellite phone had no signal here, cutting her off from the outside world completely, but instead of feeling isolated, she felt connected to something much larger than herself. The Apache had chosen this location for reasons that went beyond simple military strategy. The valley held a spiritual significance that Maria could sense even without understanding its full meaning. Springs that never ran dry despite the harsh desert climate suggested this place had been sacred long before it became a fortress. The positioning of the carved symbols followed celestial patterns, indicating the Apache had used this location for ceremonial purposes as well as protection. When Maria finally dozed off under a canopy of stars, brighter than any she had seen near civilization, her dreams were filled with figures moving silently through stone corridors. She saw Apache families finding safety in hidden chambers, warriors planning defensive strategies from concealed observation posts, and spiritual leaders conducting ceremonies in sacred chambers deep within the mountain. These weren't just military installations. They were complete communities designed to preserve Apache culture during the darkest period of their history. The morning sun revealed even more mysteries. Carefully constructed water channels directed precious rainwater into underground cisterns. Smoke from cooking fires would have been dispersed through natural rock formations, making detection impossible from a distance. Gardens had been carved into protected alcoves where medicinal plants and food crops could grow hidden from view. The Apache had created sustainable communities that could survive indefinitely while remaining completely invisible to their enemies. As Maria prepared to return to civilization, she realized her discovery would change everything historians thought they knew about the Apache resistance. These weren't temporary hiding places. They were sophisticated settlements that represented one of the most remarkable examples of military and engineering genius in American history. The question was no longer whether such places existed, but how many more remained hidden in the vast wilderness, still protecting their secrets after more than a century. Dr. James Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as he examined the photographs Maria had taken. For 40 years he had been searching for evidence of the hidden Apache strongholds his grandfather had described in faded journal entries. Now, spread across his desk at Arizona State University, were images that proved those impossible stories had been true all along. The symbols carved into the canyon walls matched descriptions from other historical accounts that had been dismissed as folklore. Maria sat across from him, still dusty from her return journey, watching his reaction carefully. She had found him through university records, knowing that any discovery this significant needed proper historical context. As Dr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and studied each photograph, with the intensity of a man seeing his life's work validated, Maria understood that she had stumbled upon something far bigger than unusual rock formations. The historian pulled out a leather-bound journal from his desk drawer, its pages yellowed with age. My grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Whitmore, wrote about chasing Apache warriors into canyons that seemed to swallow them whole, he explained, his voice thick with emotion. He described water sources that appeared from nowhere, and defensive positions that were mathematically perfect, yet invisible until you were standing right in front of them. According to the military records Dr. Whitmore had spent decades studying, the U.S. Army had deployed thousands of soldiers across Arizona and New Mexico territories during the Apache Wars. They had superior weapons, supply lines, and numbers, yet small groups of Apache fighters continued to evade capture for years. The official explanation had always been that the Apache knew the terrain better than the soldiers. But these photographs suggested something much more sophisticated. Maria's discovery revealed engineering techniques that would have required generations of planning and construction. The water management systems alone represented technology that many European settlements of the same period couldn't match. Hidden channels carved through solid rock directed seasonal rainfall into storage areas that could supply hundreds of people. Ventilation shafts provided fresh air to underground chambers while remaining invisible from ground level. Dr. Whitmore had contacted colleagues at other universities, sharing Maria's photographs under strict confidentiality agreements. The response had been immediate and dramatic. Archaeologists who had studied Apache culture for their entire careers were requesting permission to visit the site. Geological engineers wanted to analyze the construction techniques. Anthropologists were eager to study how these hidden communities had functioned as complete societies. But the most intriguing responses came from elderly members of nearby Apache tribes. When word of the discovery reached them through academic networks, several tribal elders requested private meetings with Dr. Whitmore. These conversations revealed that knowledge of the hidden fortresses had never been completely lost. It had simply been protected by generations of silence. Thomas Crowfeather, an 87-year-old member of the White Mountain Apache tribe, agreed to meet with Maria and Dr. Whitmore at his home on the reservation. His weathered hands gestured expressively as he spoke about places his great-grandfather had described in hushed tones during his childhood. The old ones never forgot, he said quietly. They just knew when it was safe to remember out loud. According to Thomas, the hidden fortresses had been built over many decades by Apache leaders who understood that their traditional way of life was under threat long before the first cavalry units arrived. Families had contributed labor and resources to create these sanctuaries, places where Apache culture could survive even if their traditional territories were lost. The locations had been chosen not just for defensive advantages, but for their spiritual significance to Apache beliefs. The construction had been a community effort involving entire clans working together. Men carved passages through solid rock while women designed living spaces that could accommodate families for extended periods. Children learned to move silently through the hidden corridors, while elders passed down the oral traditions that would preserve Apache history within these stone walls. Every aspect of these fortresses reflected Apache values of community cooperation and harmony with the natural world. Dr. Whitmore learned that Maria's discovery was just one site in what had once been an extensive network. Hidden valleys throughout Arizona and New Mexico had been connected by secret trails known only to Apache guides. Messages could be passed between fortresses without ever exposing the locations to outside observers. When military pressure became too intense in one area, entire communities could relocate to different strongholds through routes that remained invisible to pursuing soldiers. The academic implications were staggering. History books would need to be rewritten to reflect the sophisticated resistance network the Apache had created. Military historians would have to reconsider their analyses of why small groups of Native American fighters had been so successful against overwhelming odds. The Apache hadn't just been skilled warriors fighting a desperate guerrilla campaign. They had been defending a parallel civilization that most of their enemies never even knew existed as Maria and Dr. Whitmore left their meeting with Thomas Crowfeather. Both felt the weight of responsibility that came with their knowledge. The discovery could revolutionize understanding of Apache history and demonstrate engineering capabilities that challenged stereotypes about Native American societies. But it also raised difficult questions about whether revealing these secrets would honor Apache heritage or violate the trust of ancestors who had died to protect them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert as Maria led Dr. Whitmore and Thomas Crowfeather toward the hidden valley. Thomas had insisted on seeing the site himself, claiming that certain protocols needed to be followed before outsiders could truly understand what they had found. His weathered boots moved confidently across terrain that looked identical to Maria's eyes, but he navigated by landmarks invisible to anyone who hadn't grown up learning to read the desert's subtle signs. As they approached the canyon entrance, Thomas stopped suddenly and began speaking in Apache, his voice carrying across the stillness in rhythmic patterns that sounded like both prayer and announcement. Dr. Whitmore watched respectfully, understanding that they were being introduced to this place according to traditions much older than academic research protocols. Maria felt goosebumps rise on her arms as Thomas's words seemed to awaken something in the landscape around them. When they finally entered the hidden valley, Thomas's reaction surprised both his companions. Instead of amazement at seeing an archaeological wonder, his eyes filled with tears as he touched the carved symbols Maria had first noticed. "My great-grandfather Standing Bear helped carve these marks," he whispered. "He told me stories about this place when I was very young, but I thought they were just tales to teach patience and respect for our ancestors." The trio spent hours exploring passages that Maria had only glimpsed during her first visit. Thomas moved through the hidden corridors with an inherited knowledge that revealed details no academic study could have uncovered. He showed them chambers designed for specific purposes, areas where medicinal plants had been stored, spaces where children had learned traditional crafts, and observation posts that provided perfect views of approaching threats while remaining completely concealed. In one circular chamber deep within the mountain, Thomas pointed to symbols that had been painted rather than carved. The pigments had somehow remained vibrant despite being over a century old, protected by the dry air and stable temperature of the underground space. These weren't just decorative elements, they were historical records that documented major events in Apache resistance efforts. Battles that didn't appear in military histories were recorded here with precise details about dates, locations, and outcomes. Dr. Whitmore realized they were looking at primary source, documents that could completely change understanding of the Apache Wars. The paintings revealed that Apache leaders had maintained detailed intelligence networks, tracking troop movements and supply shipments with accuracy that explained their tactical successes. Maps showed locations of other hidden fortresses, creating a picture of coordinated resistance. Efforts that military historians had never suspected existed, but the most remarkable discovery came when Thomas led them to a chamber that served as a library of oral traditions made visible. The walls were covered with symbols that represented stories, songs, and ceremonial instructions. Apache culture, which outsiders had assumed was being lost during the reservation period, had actually been preserved in complete detail within these hidden spaces. Generations of knowledge that anthropologists believed had vanished forever was still here, waiting to be understood. The water system proved even more sophisticated than Maria's initial observations had suggested. Thomas explained how his ancestors had studied seasonal rainfall patterns for decades before beginning construction. The hidden channels didn't just collect water, they purified it through natural filtration systems built into the rock formations. Storage chambers maintained steady temperatures that kept water fresh for months, while overflow systems prevented flooding during heavy rains. The engineering required to create these fortresses represented knowledge accumulated over generations of Apache interaction with their environment. Every detail reflected deep understanding of geology, hydrology, and architecture that rivaled the most advanced construction techniques of the time period. The Apache had created sustainable communities that could support hundreds of people indefinitely, while remaining completely hidden from outside detection. As afternoon approached, Thomas shared stories his great-grandfather had told him about daily life within the hidden fortresses. Children had attended schools where they learned not just Apache traditions, but also skills needed to survive in a changing world. Adults had maintained workshops where they produced tools, weapons, and crafts using techniques passed down through generations. The communities had their own governing councils, religious ceremonies, and cultural celebrations that continued even while their people faced extinction in the outside world. Dr. Whitmore documented everything Thomas shared, understanding that this oral history was as valuable as any artifact they might discover. The academic world would eventually want to study these sites extensively, but the cultural knowledge that explained their true significance could only come from Apache sources. Without tribal cooperation, the fortresses would remain mysterious ruins instead of windows into one of the most remarkable survival stories in American history. When they finally prepared to leave the valley, Thomas performed another ceremony. This one focused on gratitude and protection for the spirits he believed still guarded this place. Maria found herself participating instinctively, understanding that their discovery came with responsibilities that extended far beyond scientific research. The hidden fortresses weren't just archaeological sites. They were sacred spaces that had protected Apache culture during its darkest hour. The return journey gave them time to discuss what should happen next. Thomas made it clear that any future research would need approval from tribal councils and must be conducted in ways that honored Apache values. Dr. Whitmore agreed completely, knowing that this discovery could either bridge cultural divides or deepen them, depending on how respectfully it was handled. Maria realized that her accidental find had changed her life forever, making her a guardian of secrets that belonged to people whose ancestors had died to protect them. 6 months after the initial discovery, a carefully selected team of researchers arrived at a base camp established near the hidden valley. The group included Apache tribal historians, university archaeologists, geological engineers, and cultural preservation specialists. Every member had been approved by a council of tribal elders after extensive discussions about how to study the site, while maintaining respect for its sacred significance. Dr. Sarah Running-Wolf, an Apache archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, had been chosen to lead the cultural aspects of the research. Her presence ensured that Apache perspectives would guide every decision about how the investigation proceeded. Unlike traditional archaeological digs where outsiders studied Native American sites, this project would be controlled by the descendants of the people who had built these remarkable fortresses. The team's first major discovery came when ground-penetrating radar revealed that the visible passages were only a small portion of a much larger complex. The hidden valley contained multiple levels of chambers and corridors extending deep into the mountain, connected by a sophisticated network that had taken generations to complete. Some areas appeared to have been deliberately sealed, suggesting that the Apache had protected their most sacred spaces even from other members of their own community. Maria Santos, now working as the project's geological consultant, helped map the water systems that had made long-term habitation possible. The engineering impressed her colleagues who specialized in modern infrastructure design. Ancient Apache builders had created redundant water supplies, backup storage systems, and overflow controls that ensured communities could survive extended droughts. The technology was so advanced that contemporary water management experts began studying the designs for modern applications. Carbon dating of artifacts found in sealed chambers revealed that construction had begun much earlier than anyone had expected. Some sections of the fortress network dated back over 200 years, suggesting that Apache leaders had anticipated threats to their way of life long before white settlement became widespread. The hidden communities hadn't been desperate, last resort refugees. They had been carefully planned cultural preservation centers designed to ensure Apache survival across generations. Dr. James Whitmore worked with tribal historians to translate the painted records found in the chamber walls. The documents revealed details about Apache resistance efforts that completely changed understanding of the period. Military engagements that history books described as random skirmishes had actually been carefully coordinated operations planned from these hidden command centers. Apache leaders had maintained communication networks across hundreds of miles, sharing intelligence and coordinating strategies with precision that explained their tactical successes. The most emotionally powerful discoveries came from personal artifacts found in family living spaces, children's toys carved from local wood, women's jewelry made from desert minerals, and men's tools adapted for specific tasks revealed the daily reality of life within the hidden communities. These weren't military installations where warriors hid between battles. They were homes where Apache families had created new lives while preserving their traditional culture. Thomas Crow, Feather spent weeks working with the research team, identifying areas that remained sacred and should not be disturbed. His knowledge proved invaluable for understanding how different spaces had been used and why they had been constructed in specific ways. Ceremonial chambers required different research protocols than living areas, and storage spaces needed to be studied differently than workshops or schools. The team discovered that the Apache had developed sophisticated techniques for concealing their construction activities. Debris from tunneling operations had been carefully scattered across miles of desert, making it impossible for observers to determine where excavation was taking place. Entry points had been designed to look like natural rock formations, while ventilation systems were disguised as animal dens or geological features. Advanced lighting systems allowed the research team to explore areas that had been in darkness for over a century. What they found challenged every assumption about the limitations of 19th century technology. The Apache had created mechanical systems for moving heavy stones, built drainage networks that prevented flooding, and designed storage areas that maintained stable temperatures year-round. Some chambers contained workshops, where metal tools had been forged using techniques that produced steel quality, superior to many contemporary products. Dr. Running. Wolf's analysis of the cultural preservation systems revealed the most remarkable aspect of the hidden fortresses. The Apache hadn't just been hiding from their enemies, they had been actively working to ensure their cultural survival. Traditional ceremonies had continued in secret chambers. Children had been educated in both Apache traditions and practical skills needed for changing times, and spiritual leaders had maintained religious practices that connected the hidden communities to their ancestral heritage. The research team began to understand that they were studying one of the most successful cultural preservation efforts in human history. While Apache people on reservations faced forced assimilation and cultural suppression, the hidden fortress communities had maintained complete traditional ways of life. Languages that officials thought were disappearing had actually been preserved in perfect detail, along with traditional knowledge about medicine, engineering, and spiritual practices. As winter approached, the team prepared to suspend fieldwork until spring, but their preliminary findings had already begun to reshape academic understanding of Apache capabilities and resistance strategies. The hidden fortresses represented technological and organizational achievements that challenged stereotypical assumptions about Native American societies. The Apache hadn't just been skilled fighters, they had been brilliant engineers, planners, and cultural preservationists who had created one of the most sophisticated underground civilizations in North American history. Plans were being made to establish a permanent research center that would continue studying the site while ensuring that Apache cultural protocols were respected. The discovery had attracted international attention from scholars who wanted to understand how indigenous peoples had adapted to colonization pressures. But the tribal councils made clear that access would always be controlled by Apache communities, ensuring that their ancestors' sacrifices would finally receive the recognition and respect they deserved. 2 years after Maria's accidental discovery, the Hidden Valley had become the site of the most important archaeological project in North America. But the research team faced an unexpected challenge that threatened to halt their work permanently. Word of the discovery had leaked to treasure hunters and amateur explorers, who began searching the surrounding area for other hidden sites, potentially damaging irreplaceable cultural resources. Dr. Sarah Running. Wolf received an urgent call from tribal police reporting that unauthorized excavations had been discovered in 3 different locations near known Apache historical sites. GPS devices and metal detectors abandoned at these illegal dig sites suggested that detailed information about the fortress network had somehow reached people who saw the sites as opportunities for profit rather than windows into Apache heritage. The leak appeared to have originated from university administration offices where grant applications had been filed for continued research funding. While the applications didn't include specific location details, they contained enough information for determined individuals to narrow their search areas significantly. The Apache tribal councils were furious, feeling that their trust had been violated despite all the precautions taken to protect the site's secrecy. Maria Santos found herself at the center of the controversy, as some tribal members blamed her initial report for triggering a chain of events that had compromised sacred spaces. She spent sleepless nights wondering if her discovery had done more harm than good, knowing that her intentions had been purely scientific, but understanding that good intentions didn't prevent cultural damage. The responsibility she felt was overwhelming, especially when she learned that some of the illegal excavations had damaged areas that contained irreplaceable Apache artifacts. Emergency meetings between university representatives and tribal councils resulted in the immediate suspension of all research activities while new security protocols were developed. Federal law enforcement agencies became involved, treating the unauthorized excavations as violations of the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. The investigation revealed that organized networks of artifact dealers had been monitoring academic publications and grant databases, looking for clues about significant archaeological discoveries. Thomas Crow Feather worked with younger tribal members to establish patrols that would monitor the broader area for signs of unauthorized activity. These volunteer guardians combined traditional tracking skills with modern surveillance technology, creating an early warning system that could detect intruders before they reached sensitive areas. The patrols also served a cultural purpose, giving young Apache people direct connection to their ancestral lands and the responsibility of protecting sacred sites. Dr. James Whitmore proposed a radical solution that would protect the sites while allowing research to continue. Instead of publishing detailed findings in academic journals where they could be accessed by anyone, the research team would create a restricted database available only to approved scholars and tribal members. Physical access to the sites would be limited to small groups working under direct tribal supervision, with all research conducted according to protocols established by Apache cultural advisors. The media attention surrounding the discovery created both opportunities and problems for the Apache communities involved in the project. National Geographic and other publications wanted to feature stories about the hidden fortresses, offering substantial payment for exclusive access. But tribal leaders worried that publicity would attract even more unwanted attention to areas they were struggling to protect. A compromise was reached when the tribal councils agreed to controlled media access that would focus on Apache cultural achievements rather than specific location details. Documentary filmmakers were allowed to interview tribal historians and archaeologists, but all footage was carefully reviewed to ensure that identifying landmarks were not included. The resulting programs would celebrate Apache ingenuity and resilience while maintaining the security that sacred sites required. The crisis led to important conversations about who controls archaeological discoveries and how indigenous cultural heritage should be protected. In an age of instant global communication, Apache leaders used the attention to advocate for stronger legal protections for Native American sacred sites and more meaningful involvement of tribal communities in research that affects their heritage. Dr. Running Wolf proposed establishing a new model for archaeological research that would give indigenous communities complete control over studies of their ancestral sites. The Apache Fortress Project became a test case for this approach, demonstrating that high-quality scientific research could be conducted while respecting tribal sovereignty and cultural protocols. Other Native American communities began requesting similar partnerships for archaeological projects affecting their territories. The Hidden Fortress Network proved to be even more extensive than initial surveys had suggested. Ground-penetrating radar revealed connecting passages between sites that were miles apart, indicating that the Apache had created an underground highway system that allowed secure movement across vast distances. Some of these tunnels were large enough to accommodate horses and supply wagons, suggesting that entire communities could relocate through hidden routes when Necessary analysis of artifacts found in different fortress locations revealed sophisticated trade networks that had operated independently of the official economy. Apache communities had maintained commerce with Mexican traders, other Native American tribes, and even some sympathetic American settlers, exchanging goods and information through secure channels that government authorities never discovered. The hidden fortresses had served as hubs for this shadow economy that helped sustain Apache communities during the most difficult periods of their history. The project attracted international attention from scholars studying indigenous resistance movements worldwide. The Apache Fortress Network was recognized as one of the most successful examples of cultural preservation under extreme pressure, offering lessons for contemporary indigenous communities facing similar challenges. The research team began receiving requests to share their methodologies with archaeologists working with Aboriginal communities in Australia, First Nations groups in Canada, and Indigenous peoples in South America. As the third year of research began, the Hidden Valley had become a symbol of both Apache resilience and the challenges of protecting cultural heritage in the modern world. The site represented not just an archaeological discovery, but a new model for collaborative research that honored indigenous knowledge while advancing scientific understanding. The spirits of time that had protected these secrets for over a century now watched as their descendants worked to ensure that Apache achievements would finally receive the recognition they had always deserved. 5 years after Maria Santos first stumbled into the Hidden Valley, the Apache Fortress discovery had transformed from an archaeological project into a cultural renaissance that was changing lives across multiple Native American communities. The research center established near the site had become a model for indigenous-controlled scholarship, demonstrating that traditional knowledge and modern scientific methods could work together to unlock secrets that neither approach could reveal alone. The most profound impact had been on Apache youth who had grown up feeling disconnected from their ancestral heritage. Working as cultural interpreters and research assistants on the project, young Apache people had discovered that their ancestors had been brilliant engineers, strategists, and cultural preservationists. The hidden fortresses provided tangible proof that Apache culture represented sophisticated achievements that deserved respect and study, not the romanticized stereotypes that popular culture typically portrayed. Maria Santos had accepted a permanent position as the project's chief geological consultant, finding that her accidental discovery had led to the most meaningful work of her career. She had learned to read the landscape through Apache eyes, understanding that geological features carried cultural significance beyond their scientific properties. Her collaboration with tribal knowledge keepers had revolutionized her approach to environmental science, teaching her to see water sources, mineral deposits, and rock formations as elements in complex cultural systems. Dr. Sarah Runningwolf had been appointed as the first director of Indigenous Archaeological Studies at a major university, a position created specifically to recognize the success of the Apache Fortress project. Her work had established new protocols for archaeological research that ensured tribal communities maintained control over studies affecting their heritage. Universities across the country were adopting similar programs, acknowledging that indigenous knowledge was essential for understanding Native American archaeological sites. The Hidden Fortress Network had been revealed to include over 40 separate locations connected by underground passages, concealed trails, and communication systems that spanned hundreds of miles. Some sites had been built for specific purposes: medical centers where traditional healers had treated patients using advanced surgical techniques, educational facilities where children had learned both Apache traditions and practical skills for survival in a changing world, and spiritual retreats where religious leaders had preserved ceremonial knowledge through the darkest periods of cultural suppression. Thomas Crow Feather had become an internationally recognized expert on Apache cultural preservation, traveling to conferences where he shared traditional knowledge with scholars and indigenous activists from around the world. At 89 years old, he had lived to see his great-grandfather's stories validated by scientific evidence and recognized as historical fact rather than folklore. The transformation brought him deep satisfaction, knowing that Apache ancestors who had died protecting these secrets would finally receive the honor they deserved. The technological achievements documented at the fortress sites had attracted attention from modern engineering firms seeking to understand how Apache builders had solved complex problems, using only traditional tools and materials. The water management systems had inspired new approaches to sustainable architecture in desert environments. The ventilation systems that had kept underground chambers comfortable year-round were being studied by designers, working on energy-efficient buildings. The cultural preservation systems discovered within the fortresses had proven even more remarkable than their engineering achievements. Complete libraries of oral traditions had been maintained through systematic teaching programs that ensured every adult could preserve and transmit essential cultural knowledge. Traditional medicines had been cultivated in hidden gardens that maintained genetic diversity of healing plants. Artistic traditions had been practiced and refined in underground workshops that produced crafts of extraordinary quality. Dr. James Whitmore had finally completed the historical research that had consumed 4 decades of his career. His definitive account of the Apache resistance revealed that military historians had completely misunderstood the sophistication of Native American opposition to colonization. The Apache hadn't been conducting desperate guerrilla warfare. They had been implementing a comprehensive strategy designed to preserve their culture while adapting to changing circumstances. The hidden fortresses represented just one element of a survival plan that had successfully protected Apache identity through the most challenging period in their history. The project had attracted support from unexpected sources, including descendants of cavalry officers who had participated in the Apache Wars. Some military families had preserved letters and documents that provided additional evidence of the hidden fortress network, offering to share these materials as contributions to historical accuracy. These collaborations demonstrated that acknowledging difficult historical truths could bring communities together rather than dividing them. But international recognition of the Apache fortress discovery had led to UNESCO designation of the sites as World Heritage locations, ensuring their protection under international law. The designation acknowledged both the remarkable engineering achievements and the cultural significance of these hidden communities. The Apache tribal councils had negotiated terms that maintained their control over access while establishing permanent funding for continued research and preservation. The hidden valley where Maria had made her original discovery had been designated as the centerpiece of a new Apache cultural center that would serve both educational and ceremonial purposes. Visitors could learn about Apache history and achievements while respecting the sacred nature of the site. The center employed dozens of tribal members as guides, interpreters, and cultural specialists, providing economic opportunities that were directly connected to preserving Apache heritage. As the project entered its 6th year, the most important discoveries were still being made. Each new chamber revealed additional evidence of Apache sophistication and resilience. The fortress network had enabled Apache communities to maintain their cultural integrity while adapting to external pressures, creating a model of successful indigenous resistance that offered hope and inspiration to Native American communities worldwide. The spirits of time that had protected these secrets for over a century had finally allowed them to be revealed. When the world was ready to understand their true significance, the hidden fortresses of the Apache had emerged from darkness not just as archaeological wonders, but as proof that indigenous peoples had created remarkable civilizations that deserved recognition as among humanity's greatest achievements. The army had never found these strongholds because they had been protected by something more powerful than stone walls. They had been preserved by the determination of people who refused to let their culture disappear.